My son called me human garbage in front of an entire room of silk-dressed elites. The champagne flutes stopped midair, conversations died, and 50 pairs of eyes turned to watch me crumble. But he didn't know that the woman he'd just humiliated controlled the one thing his precious new family couldn't live without: their waste removal. He didn't know that garbage had taught me patience, strategy, and how to destroy someone without lifting a finger. Tonight, I'd use everything trash had taught me to bury his dreams where they belonged. My name is Eleanor Graves, and at 68 years old, I thought I'd experienced every kind of pain life could serve. I was wrong. The Ellison mansion sprawled across 3 acres in Paradise Hills, its marble columns reaching toward the New Mexico sky like fingers grasping for heaven. I'd parked my Lincoln Navigator, the only luxury I allowed myself, between a Bentley and a Tesla, feeling the weight of every step as I walked toward the grand entrance. My son Daniel had insisted I come alone. "Dad's been gone 15 years. Mom, you don't need to bring anyone else," he'd said. I should have heard the warning in his voice. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast rainbow fragments across guests who wore their wealth like armor. Women in designer gowns that cost more than my first truck floated past, their diamonds catching light with every gesture. Men in Italian suits discussed stock portfolios and yacht purchases, their laughter rich with the confidence of generational wealth. And there, in the center of it all, stood my Daniel. He looked magnificent in his charcoal Tom Ford suit, a gift from the Ellisons, no doubt. His fiancée Amelia clung to his arm, her smile practiced and cold as winter frost. She was everything I wasn't: young, polished, born into money so old it had its own pedigree. Her father, Richard Ellison, held court near the fireplace, his silver hair gleaming as he regaled guests with stories of his latest development project. "Mother," Daniel said when he saw me, and something in that single word made my stomach drop. Not Mom, like he'd called me for 35 years. Mother. Formal, distant, a stranger's greeting. "Danny," I replied, reaching to embrace him, but he stepped back, guiding me instead toward the Ellison family circle with a hand that barely touched my elbow. "Everyone," he announced, his voice carrying across the room. "I'd like you to meet my mother, Eleanor." The conversations quieted, faces turning toward me with polite curiosity that quickly shifted to something else. Confusion, perhaps, or carefully masked disdain. I'd worn my best dress, navy blue with modest pearls, but standing among these people, I might as well have shown up in my work coveralls. "And what do you do, Eleanor?" Richard Ellison asked, his tone suggesting he already knew and was merely setting a stage. Before I could answer, Daniel jumped in. "She's in the service industry." "Oh, how interesting," Amelia's mother, Patricia, chimed in. "What kind of services? Event planning, interior design?" The room waited. I straightened my spine, proud of every callus, every 16-hour day, every sacrifice that built my company. I own Graves Waste Solutions. We handle waste management and recycling for half of New Mexico. The silence that followed was suffocating. Patricia's wine glass paused halfway to her lips. Richard's smile became fixed, plastic, and Amelia, sweet, pristine Amelia, actually took a small step away from me, as if poverty might be contagious. "Waste management," Richard repeated slowly, savoring each syllable like spoiled wine. "How essential." "Someone has to do it," I said, meeting his gaze steadily. "Yes," Daniel said suddenly, his voice sharp and bitter. "Someone does." He turned to face me fully then, and what I saw in his eyes, shame, disgust, rage, knocked the breath from my lungs. Though I've spent most of my life wishing it wasn't my mother, do you have any idea what it was like, being known as the garbage kid? Having friends refuse to come over because they thought our house would smell? "Daniel," I whispered, but he was just getting started. "I used to lie," he continued, his voice rising, "told everyone you were in environmental services, but they always found out. Someone would see your trucks, see your name on the side, and then the jokes would start again. Danny Garbage, Trash Boy, and now, he gestured wildly around the room. Now I'm finally somewhere, finally becoming someone, and you show up here, proud of being nothing more than human garbage. The words hit me like physical blows. Human garbage. My son, my baby boy who I'd raised alone, who I'd sacrificed everything for, stood there in his designer suit bought with money from the company he despised, calling me human garbage. The room erupted in nervous whispers. Someone actually laughed. A short, shocked sound quickly stifled. Amelia touched Daniel's arm as if to calm him, but her eyes glittered with satisfaction. She'd wanted this. I realized, this public execution. This final severing of ties between her golden future husband and his unfortunate past. I stood there, 68 years old, successful beyond my wildest dreams, and felt like the 23-year-old widow again, lost and alone with a baby and nothing else. But I wasn't that girl anymore. That girl had built an empire from nothing. That girl had survived. I looked my son in the eye and spoke clearly, letting my voice carry to every corner of that obscenely opulent room. Human garbage isn't the person who collects it, Daniel. It's the one who forgets where he came from and spits on the hands that fed him. Then I turned and walked out, my head high, my steps measured. Behind me, the party exploded into excited chatter, the Ellisons no doubt reassuring their guests, Daniel probably playing the victim of his unfortunate upbringing. But as I sat in my Navigator, hands gripping the steering wheel, I wasn't thinking about my broken heart or shattered relationship with my only child. I was thinking about contracts, about business, about the fact that Richard Ellison's entire real estate empire depended on my trucks showing up every single day. My son had called me human garbage, and he was about to learn that garbage, when not properly managed, had a way of piling up exactly where you didn't want it. The drive home took me past the industrial district where it all began. I pulled over at the old warehouse on Frontage Road, now abandoned, its windows dark as empty eye sockets. This was where I'd parked my first truck 28 years ago. A rusty Ford F350 that broke down more often than it ran. I sat there in the darkness, remembering. James had been dead 6 months when the bank foreclosed on our house. The life insurance he'd sworn he had turned out to be another broken promise, leaving me with $43 in checking, a 7-year-old son, and nowhere to go. We'd lived in my car for 2 weeks before I saw the ad. Truck driver wanted, waste removal. The owner, Big Mike Kowalski, took one look at me, 90 pounds soaking wet, dark circles under my eyes, and laughed. "This ain't women's work, sweetheart." "I need the job," I'd said simply. "I'll work twice as hard as any man you've got." Maybe it was desperation in my voice, or maybe Big Mike had a soft spot for lost causes. But he hired me on the spot. 4:30 a.m. starts, 15-hour days, hauling commercial dumpsters that weighed more than I did. My hands bled through the work gloves. My back screamed every time I lifted. But every Friday, I got a paycheck that meant Daniel could eat. I learned the business from the ground up, literally. Which restaurants produced the most food waste? Which construction sites paid premium for weekend pickups? Which contracts had the highest profit margins? Big Mike, gruff as he was, became a mentor. "Garbage is gold, Eleanor." He'd tell me, "People will always make trash, and someone's got to haul it. Do it right, do it reliable, and you'll never go hungry." Daniel was 10 when I bought my first truck with a loan that had interest rates that would make a loan shark blush. I painted Graves Waste Solutions on the side myself, staying up until 3 a.m. to get the letters straight. He helped, holding the stencils while I sprayed, both of us high on paint fumes and possibility. "We're business owners now, baby," I'd told him, ruffling his hair. "This truck is going to pay for your college." He'd been so proud then, drew pictures of garbage trucks in school, told everyone his mom was an entrepreneur. When kids teased him, he'd shoot back that his mom could buy and sell their parents. It wasn't true then, but his faith in me made me work harder, drive longer, bid on bigger contracts. By the time he hit high school, I had 6 trucks and 12 employees. We'd moved from the trailer park to a real house with a yard and a 2-car garage. I could afford things, not luxury, but comfort. New clothes instead of thrift store finds, brand name groceries, a used Honda Civic for Daniel's 16th birthday. But something had shifted in him by then. He stopped telling people what I did for a living, started spending more time at friends' houses, especially the wealthy kids from the Heights. When I showed up at school events straight from work, still in my coveralls, he'd pretend not to see me. "Why can't you dress normal?" he'd snapped once after a parent-teacher conference. Everyone was staring. "Let them stare," I'd replied. "These clothes paid for your SAT prep courses." College was Columbia, his dream school, my pride and joy, $42,000 a year that I paid in cash. Every dollar earned from routes that started before dawn and ended after dark. He never told his roommates where the money came from. When I visited for Parents' Weekend, he introduced me to his friends as working in municipal services. I let him have his fiction. I thought he'd outgrow the shame. The business kept growing. By his senior year, I had the largest independent waste management company in the state, 32 trucks, 60 employees, contracts with the biggest names in commercial real estate, including, as fate would have it, Ellison Enterprises. Richard Ellison had fought me on that contract, tried to lowball, tried to bring in national chains, but I knew my numbers, knew my worth, and most importantly, knew his properties produced specialized waste that required careful handling. Medical facilities, restaurants, chemical processing, all needed expertise the big boys couldn't match with their one-size-fits-all approach. I won that contract fair and square, and it became the cornerstone of both our businesses. Daniel never asked how I afforded his MBA at Wharton, never wondered how I paid cash for his luxury apartment in Philadelphia, the European graduation trip, the seed money for his first investment ventures. He just took it, the same way he'd taken everything else, as if it materialized from thin air instead of from the sweat and sacrifice of a woman who'd learned to find gold in what others threw away. I started the Navigator and pulled back onto the road, passing the fleet yard where 32 green trucks sat waiting for tomorrow's routes. Each one represented a family fed, a mortgage paid, a future secured. My employees called me Miss Eleanor, brought their kids to the company picnics, sent Christmas cards with photos of the grandchildren. To them, I wasn't garbage. I was the woman who'd given them good jobs with benefits and dignity. But to my son, I was an embarrassment to be discarded. As I drove through the gates of my modest ranch house, nothing like the Ellison mansion, but mine, paid for with honest work, I made a decision. Daniel thought he could wash his hands of me, pretend I never existed, build his shining future on the Ellison name while standing on the foundation I'd built. He was about to learn that in the waste management business, we had a saying, "What goes around comes around." And sometimes, what comes around is a 40-ton truck full of consequences. The humiliation burned deeper as the night wore on. I sat in my kitchen, unable to eat, replaying every word, every sneer, every laugh that had rippled through that glittering crowd. The grandfather clock James's mother had left us chimed 11 p.m., and still the scene played on repeat in my mind. Richard Ellison's voice echoed the loudest. Before Daniel's outburst, when I'd first mentioned my company, he'd actually smirked. "Graves Waste Solutions? Oh yes. You're our sanitation vendor." The way he'd said it, like I was the help who'd wandered into the wrong room. Though I must say, I've never had one of our service providers attend a family gathering before. "I'm not here as a service provider," I'd said evenly. "I'm here as Daniel's mother." "Of course," Patricia Ellison had interjected, her smile sharp as glass. How modern of Daniel to be so inclusive, though one does wonder about the, shall we say, cultural differences. "Amelia, darling, have you discussed with Daniel how you'll handle the wedding guest list? I imagine there might be some interesting contrasts." Amelia had laughed, a tinkling sound like breaking champagne flutes. "Oh, we've already decided on an intimate affair. Family and close friends only. Quality over quantity. You understand." The meaning was clear. My people, the mechanics and drivers and dispatchers who'd watched Daniel grow up, wouldn't be welcome at their sacred ceremony. But it was what happened after Daniel's human garbage declaration that cut the deepest. As I'd walked toward the door, forcing my spine straight and my head high, I'd heard Richard Ellison's voice carrying over the shocked whispers. Well, that was unfortunate, but I suppose we can't choose our origins, can we? The important thing is that Daniel has clearly risen above his circumstances. Amelia, darling, you've chosen a man who knows how to distance himself from unsavory elements. That takes character. More champagne? Patricia had suggested brightly. Let's not let one person's lack of social graces ruin Amelia's special evening. The party had resumed as if I'd never existed, as if 35 years of my life hadn't just been reduced to a punchline. My phone, silent since I'd left, suddenly buzzed with a text from Daniel. That was necessary. You need to understand your place in my new life. Don't contact me until you're ready to apologize for embarrassing me. Apologize. He wanted me to apologize. I stood and walked to my home office, flipping on the lights. The walls were covered with photos, company milestones, employee appreciation dinners, Chamber of Commerce awards. In the center hung my favorite, Daniel at 12, standing in front of our first fleet truck, his smile bright with pride. Graves and Son Waste Solutions, he'd suggested that day. When I grow up, we'll run it together. I pulled out my laptop and opened the Ellison Enterprises file. 5 years of contracts, meticulously detailed. They weren't just any client, they were our largest, accounting for 32% of our annual revenue. Richard Ellison owned 17 commercial properties, from the Meridian Shopping Center to the Desert Palm Medical Complex. Each one required specialized waste management services. The medical complex alone was a masterpiece of logistics. Hazardous waste, biological materials, pharmaceutical disposal, all requiring certified handling and EPA-compliant processing. We'd invested $200,000 in specialized equipment just to service their needs. No other local company had the certifications or capacity to handle it. The shopping center was equally complex. 43 retail tenants, 7 restaurants, a movie theater, each with different waste streams, different schedules, different requirements. We ran 18 pickups daily, 7 days a week. During holiday seasons, we doubled our fleet just for them. I studied the contract terms. Rock solid, I'd thought. 5-year commitment, penalties for early termination, guaranteed service levels. But there, in subsection 47.3 was the clause I'd insisted on years ago. Either party may terminate with 60 days' notice in the event of irreconcilable business conflicts or ethical concerns. Richard had balked at that clause. Ethical concerns? What ethical concerns could arise in garbage collection? You'd be surprised, I'd told him. Sometimes business relationships become untenable for reasons beyond service and price. He'd laughed and signed, probably thinking a small-time garbage hauler would never dare invoke it against the mighty Ellison Enterprises. My phone rang. Maria, my night dispatcher. Miss Eleanor, sorry to bother you so late, but we've got an issue at the Meridian Shopping Center. Somebody dumped what looks like construction waste in the retail compactors. It's jammed the whole system. Send Team 3, and I said, I'll meet them there. Ma'am, you don't need to... I'll be there in 20 minutes. I changed into my work clothes, steel-toed boots, coveralls with my name embroidered on the pocket, the uniform my son found so shameful. As I drove toward the shopping center, I thought about shame. Daniel was ashamed of honest work, ashamed of the woman who'd sacrificed everything for him, ashamed of the business that had given him every opportunity. But I wasn't ashamed, not of the nights spent unclogging compactors, not of the smell that clung to my clothes, not of the calluses that marked my hands. Every bit of dirt under my fingernails was a badge of honor, proof that I'd built something from nothing. At the shopping center, my crew was already at work. Jorge, who'd been with me 15 years, nodded as I approached. Looks like someone renovated a store and tried to cheap out on construction disposal. concrete chunks, drywall, the works. I pulled on my gloves and got to work alongside my team. As we cleared the jam, Jorge said quietly, "Heard what happened tonight, Miss Eleanor. My wife's cousin works catering for the Ellisons. Said your boy did you wrong." "Word travels fast," I said. "You gave that kid everything," Jorge continued, his voice angry. "We all remember when you'd bring him on routes, teaching him the business. Ungrateful little—" "Jorge," I warned. He fell silent, but the loyalty in his eyes meant more than any society party invitation ever could. It was past 1 a.m. when we finished, the compactors running smooth again. As I watched my crew load up their equipment, efficient and professional, I made my decision. The Ellisons thought they were above the people who handled their waste. Daniel thought he could build a new life by throwing away his old one. They were all about to learn that when you declare someone garbage, you better make sure you don't need them to haul away your trash. Monday morning arrived with a phone call that changed everything. Harrison Klein, CEO of National Environmental Solutions, had been courting me for 2 years. His offer had always been generous, but not quite enough to make me let go of what I'd built. That morning, his voice carried a different urgency. "Eleanor, I heard you were at the Ellison party Saturday night. My condolences on difficult family situations. But I'm calling because we're prepared to make our final offer. $52 million for 70% of Graves Waste Solutions, with you retaining operational control for 2 years. $52 million. I sat down slowly. That's quite a jump from your last offer, Harrison. The board finally sees what I've been telling them. You've got the best regional operation in the Southwest. Your contracts alone are worth gold, especially the Ellison portfolio. Speaking of which, that's actually part of why I'm calling. We need someone who understands complex commercial relationships. You've managed to keep Richard Ellison happy for 5 years. That's practically a miracle in this business. I almost laughed at the irony. When do you need an answer? We're prepared to move fast. Can you meet me Wednesday? Bring your lawyers. If we agree to terms, we can sign a letter of intent by Friday. After I hung up, I pulled out the spreadsheets I'd updated just last week. The company was valued at $38 million on paper, but Harrison was right. The contracts pushed it higher. The Ellison account alone guaranteed $12 million in revenue over the next 3 years. My phone buzzed. Carla from accounting. "Eleanor, I'm processing the quarterly reports. Should I send the Ellison metrics over to their office as usual?" "Hold off on that," I said. "I want to review everything first." I spent the rest of Monday diving deep into our books. The Ellison properties were profitable but demanding. They required specialized equipment, dedicated crews, and constant attention. The profit margins were slimmer than our other accounts because Richard had negotiated hard. Knowing his volume gave him leverage. But here was the thing Richard didn't know. His properties produced some of the most legally complex waste in our portfolio. The medical facilities generated hazardous materials that required special licensing to handle. The restaurants produced grease waste that needed specific processing to meet environmental standards. The shopping center's volume meant any service disruption would result in health code violations within 48 hours. Tuesday brought another revelation. My lawyer, Janet Morrison, called with interesting news. "Eleanor, I've been reviewing the Ellison contract as you asked. That termination clause you insisted on, it's bilateral. If you invoke it, they can't sue for breach. But more importantly, there's no requirement for you to provide transition services or help them find a replacement vendor." Meaning? Meaning if you give them 60 days notice, you can walk away clean. No obligation to help them find another hauler. No requirement to share your operational procedures, of course. Finding a replacement vendor with your certifications and capacity. That could take them considerably longer than 60 days. I thought about Richard Ellison's smirk, Patricia's condescension, Amelia's calculated cruelty, but mostly, I thought about Daniel, my son who took my money while despising its source, who wore suits bought with garbage profits while calling me human garbage. "Draft the termination notice," I told Janet, but don't send it yet. Wednesday's meeting with Harrison Klein took place in his Phoenix office. He'd assembled his full team: lawyers, accountants, integration specialists. They'd done their homework, presenting detailed analyses of how Graves Waste Solutions would fit into their national network. "Your operational efficiency is 12% above industry standard," Harrison said, sliding charts across the conference table. "Your safety record is impeccable. Employee retention at 87% versus the industry average of 42%. But what really impresses us is your contract portfolio. Stable, long-term relationships with premium clients." "About that," I said carefully, "I need to disclose that I'm considering some changes to our client base." Harrison's eyes sharpened. "Changes?" "I believe in doing business with people who share our values: respect for workers, appreciation for essential services. Some of our current clients may not align with that vision going forward." "The Ellison account?" Harrison guessed. News of Saturday night had clearly reached him. "Eleanor, I understand personal feelings, but that's a $12 million decision." $52 million, I corrected. "That's the decision I'm making today. Whether to sell you a company that comprises everything I've built, everything I've sacrificed for. If I do this deal, I want operational control to include client selection, non-negotiable." The room went silent. Harrison's team exchanged glances. This wasn't how negotiations typically went. Sellers didn't usually demand less valuable contracts. But I wasn't a typical seller. "Give us a moment," Harrison said finally. They stepped out, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Through the window, I could see the Phoenix skyline, glass and steel reaching toward the desert sun, somewhere in this city. Daniel was probably sitting in an air-conditioned office, planning his wedding to Amelia, building his new life on the foundation of Ellison money and connections. He'd thrown me away like garbage, but garbage had value if you knew how to process it. And I'd spent 28 years learning exactly how to extract worth from what others discarded. Harrison returned, his expression carefully neutral. "The board agrees to your terms with one condition. Any client changes must be based on legitimate business reasons. Document everything. We can't have it looking like personal vendettas." "Mr. Klein," I said, standing to shake his hand, "I've built this company on one principle. We handle everyone's waste with professionalism and respect. But respect is a two-way street. Any client who can't offer that same respect to our workers, our company, or our leadership isn't a client we need. Even if that client is Richard Ellison, especially if that client is Richard Ellison." We signed the letter of intent at 4:17 p.m. $52 million for a company I'd started with one broken-down truck and a desperate need to feed my son, the same son who now considered me an embarrassment. That evening, I called Janet. "Send the termination notice to Ellison Enterprises. Time it to arrive during their Thursday morning board meeting." "You're sure about this?" I thought about Daniel's words, echoing in that crystal-bright room. Human garbage. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The dominoes were in place. All that remained was to watch them fall. Thursday morning broke clear and cold. I arrived at my office at 5 a.m., as always. But today felt different. Today. I was setting something in motion that couldn't be undone. Janet had confirmed the termination notice would be delivered by courier at exactly 10:15 a.m., right in the middle of Ellison Enterprises' quarterly board meeting. I'd crafted the notice carefully with Janet's help, professional, citing Section 47.3 referencing irreconcilable differences in business philosophy and ethical standards. No mention of Saturday night, no hint of the personal, just a clean, corporate execution. At 9:45 a.m., my phone rang. Marcus Webb, my operations director, sounded puzzled. "Eleanor, I just got a strange call from Ellison's facility manager at the medical complex. Wanted to confirm our pickup schedule for next week. Seemed real anxious about some inspection they have coming up." "Tell him to refer all questions to their corporate office after 10:30. I said, "Everything okay, boss?" "Everything's perfect. Marcus, start pulling the Ellison route schedules. We'll need to reassign those crews in 60 days. At 10:23 a.m., my phone exploded. 3 calls from Richard Ellison's office, 2 from their legal department, 4 from various property managers. I let them all go to voicemail, savoring the silence before the storm. The first coherent call came at 11:05 a.m. from Richard himself. I'd never heard him sound anything less than supremely controlled, but now his voice crackled with barely contained fury. "Eleanor, what the hell is this? You can't seriously be terminating our contract over some family nonsense." "Mr. Ellison," I replied calmly, "this is a business decision based on philosophical differences. As stated in the notice, we're honoring the 60-day term as required." Philosophical differences? We've worked together for 5 years. Yes, and recent events have made it clear our values no longer align. Graves Waste Solutions believes in treating all workers, at every level, with dignity and respect. We can no longer service clients who don't share that belief. This is about Saturday night. This is pathetic revenge because your son finally told you the truth about... "Mr. Ellison," I interrupted, "I'd be very careful about finishing that sentence. This call is being recorded for business purposes. Any defamatory statements about my company or leadership could result in legal action." He sputtered, caught between rage and legal caution. "You can't do this. Do you have any idea what this will cost us? The medical complex alone requires specialized hazmat handling. The shopping center needs 18 pickups daily. Where am I supposed to find another company with your certifications?" "That's no longer my concern. You have 60 days to make arrangements." "I'll sue. Breach of contract, tortious interference." Section 47.3, I recited. "Termination for ethical concerns, ironclad, Mr. Ellison. Your own lawyers approved that language 5 years ago." "This will ruin you," he snarled. "When word gets out that you dropped the Ellison account over personal grudges, no major client will trust you. I'll make sure of it." "Actually," I said, allowing myself a small smile he couldn't see, "I've just signed papers to sell majority stake to National Environmental Solutions. They're fully aware of and supportive of my decision to terminate clients who don't align with our corporate values. But thank you for your concern about my business prospects." The silence that followed was beautiful. Richard Ellison, real estate mogul, master of the universe, had just realized he'd been outmaneuvered by the woman he'd dismissed as human garbage. "Your son works for me," he said finally, his voice low and dangerous. "One word from me and..." "Mr. Ellison, are you threatening my son's employment based on my business decisions? Because that would be workplace retaliation. And I'm sure Daniel would have grounds for a substantial lawsuit. Shall I have my lawyer contact his?" Another pause. I could practically hear him grinding his teeth. 60 days, he spat. "We'll have a new vendor in place within the week." "I hope so," I said pleasantly. "For your sake. Oh, and Mr. Ellison? You'll want to check subsection 12.8 of our contract. All specialized equipment we've placed on your properties remains our property. We'll be removing it on day 59. That includes the medical waste incinerator at Desert Palm, the grease processing units at all 7 restaurants, and the specialized compactors at Meridian. Have a good day." I hung up before he could respond. Within minutes, Daniel's name flashed on my phone screen. I let it ring through to voicemail, then played the message. "Mom, what did you do?" His voice was panicked. Nothing like the cold contempt of Saturday night. "Mr. Ellison just stormed out of the board meeting. He mentioned your company. Something about contracts. This better not be what I think it is. Call me back. Now." I deleted the message and went back to work. Over the next 3 hours, I fielded calls from my management team, reassuring them about the transition, explaining that losing the Ellison account was part of a larger strategy. The sale to National Environmental would secure everyone's jobs with better benefits. The Ellison routes would be redistributed to maximize efficiency for our remaining clients. At 2:30 p.m., Maria knocked on my door. "Miss Eleanor, there's a Daniel Graves here to see you. Says it's urgent. Should I?" "Send him in," I said, straightening papers on my desk. Daniel burst through the door, still in his expensive suit, but his face was flushed. his perfect hair disheveled. "How could you do this to me?" "Hello, Daniel, please, sit down." "Sit down? You just destroyed my career and you want me to sit down?" "I terminated a business contract with a client whose values don't align with ours. How does that affect your career?" "Don't play dumb," he snarled, pacing my small office like a caged animal. "Richard's talking about scaling back operations, maybe selling the medical complex. Amelia's father is reconsidering my position. This is all your fault." I leaned back in my chair, studying the stranger wearing my son's face. "Saturday night, you called me human garbage in front of 50 people. You announced that you were ashamed of me, of the work that fed and clothed you, of the company that paid for your education. Did you think there wouldn't be consequences?" They expected me to distance myself from—" He stopped, running his hands through his hair. "You don't understand what it's like, trying to fit into their world." "No," I agreed. "I don't understand turning your back on family to impress people who'll never respect you anyway. But I do understand business, Daniel. And I understand that respect is non-negotiable." "So you're ruining my life over respect?" "I'm running my business according to my principles. If that ruins your life, perhaps you should examine what you've built it on." He stared at me, and for just a moment, I saw the little boy who used to help me paint trucks, who dreamed of being my partner. Then his face hardened again. "You're going to regret this," he said. "When I'm running Ellison Enterprises, when I have real power, you'll wish you'd been smarter." "Maybe," I said, "but I'd rather be human garbage with integrity than a success built on betrayal." He left without another word. Slamming the door behind him, I sat in the quiet that followed, feeling the weight of 28 years of love turn to ash. But alongside the grief was something else, a clean, sharp satisfaction. The game was far from over. Richard Ellison thought he could find another vendor easily. He was about to learn how specialized his needs really were, and how few companies could meet them on short notice. And Daniel? He wanted to rise by stepping on others. He was about to learn how hard the fall could be when you've burned the bridges beneath you. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of meetings, paperwork, and increasingly desperate calls from the Ellison organization. I kept a running tally, purely for business documentation purposes, of course. By week 2, they'd contacted every major waste management company in a 3-state radius. The responses were illuminating. Waste Solutions International. Sorry, we don't have hazmat certification for medical facilities in New Mexico. Southwest Disposal Corp. We could handle the shopping center, but not the medical complex. Maybe in 6 months when we get certified? EnviroClean Services. We'd need to purchase specialized equipment. Lead time is 16 weeks minimum. Marcus kept me updated on the chaos unfolding at Ellison Properties. "The Meridian managers are panicking," he reported during our Monday morning meeting. "Apparently, they've been using temporary dumpsters from 3 different companies. The parking lot looks like a waste management convention." "And the medical complex?" "Still calling us directly, begging for extensions. Doctor. Patel actually offered to pay us personally to keep servicing just the surgical center. Said something about state inspections next month." I maintained professional distance from the situation, focusing on the sale to National Environmental. Harrison Klein flew in twice to review operations, each time more impressed with what we'd built. "You know," he said during his second visit, "the industry's buzzing about Ellison's predicament. Nobody can figure out why you walked away from that much guaranteed revenue." "Sometimes the cost of money is too high," I replied. "The cost being your dignity?" He smiled knowingly. "I heard about the party. My wife knows Patricia Ellison from some charity board. Vicious woman, apparently." "I wouldn't know. I judge people by how they treat my employees and my company. The Ellisons failed on both counts." Wednesday of week 3 brought an unexpected visitor, Amelia Ellison herself, designer heels clicking across my warehouse floor. Looking distinctly out of place among the garbage trucks, Maria escorted her to my office, eyes wide with curiosity. Amelia sat down without invitation, her perfect composure slightly cracked around the edges. "Mrs. Graves." Miss Graves, I corrected. I've been widowed longer than I was married. Miss Graves. She clutched her Hermes bag like a shield. I'm here to discuss the contract situation. I don't believe you're authorized to negotiate for Ellison Enterprises. Not officially, but as someone who's about to join the family, I have a vested interest in resolving this misunderstanding. I leaned back, studying her. 3 weeks ago, she'd laughed at my humiliation. Now she sat in my office, in the building that smelled faintly of motor oil and industrial cleaner, asking for my help. There's no misunderstanding, I said. The contract was terminated according to its terms. Your future father-in-law has 39 days to find alternative arrangements. He's trying, but your company has created a monopoly on specialized waste services. It's anti-competitive. It's called being good at what we do. We invested in equipment, training, certifications. That's not a monopoly. That's competence. She shifted uncomfortably. Daniel says you're doing this to punish him. Daniel flatters himself. This is business. Business? She laughed, brittle and sharp. Destroying your son's career is business. I'm not destroying anything. I'm choosing who I do business with. If Daniel's career can't survive his future father-in-law's waste management problems, perhaps he should have chosen a more stable foundation than the Ellison family favor. You don't understand, she said, leaning forward. This is affecting everything. Daddy's had to postpone 2 property acquisitions because the banks are concerned about operational stability. The board is asking questions. And Daniel made his choice Saturday night. He was trying to fit in. The words burst out of her, surprising us both. Do you know what it's like for him? Coming from this? She gestured around my office. The other associates at the firm, they went to prep schools, had trust funds. Daniel had to work twice as hard to prove he belonged. And yes, that meant distancing himself from the mother who made his success possible? She fell silent, recomposing herself. When she spoke again, her voice was pure business. What would it take to restore the contract? Nothing you're prepared to offer. Try me. Money? We'll double the rates. I just sold my company for $52 million. I don't need Ellison money. An apology then, Daddy would... Your father would choke on the words, and it wouldn't matter anyway. Some bridges, once burned, don't get rebuilt. She stood abruptly. You're making a mistake. When this is over, when you've had your petty revenge, Daniel will still be part of our family. You'll be alone with your principals and your garbage trucks. I've been alone before, I said. At least my garbage trucks never called me human garbage. She strode out, heels clicking faster than when she'd arrived. An hour later, Daniel called. This time, I answered. Whatever Amelia offered, I'll double it, he said without preamble. You can't afford me, Daniel. Mom, please. The words sounded foreign in his mouth, like he'd forgotten how to say it. This is getting serious. Richard's talking about restructuring the whole company. My position... Is that why you're calling? Your position? I'm calling because this has gone too far. You've made your point. What point would that be? That you have power, that you matter, that I shouldn't have said what I said. Is that an apology? Silence stretched between us, finally. I'm sorry you were offended. No, Daniel, you're sorry there were consequences. There's a difference. What do you want from me? His voice cracked slightly. You want me to grovel? To beg? Fine. I'm begging. Please restore the contract. I want the son who used to be proud of his mother. But that boy's been gone a long time, hasn't he? You killed him the day you decided I was an embarrassment. That's not... I never... He took a shuddering breath. I'm still your son. No, I said quietly. My son would never have called me human garbage. My son would have defended me in that room full of snobs. My son would have said, this is my mother, who built an empire from nothing, who never missed one of my games or concerts despite working 18-hour days, who paid cash for my Ivy League education. That was my son. I don't know who you are. Mom, 40 days. Daniel, That's what Ellison Enterprises has left. I suggest you update your resume. I hung up on his protests, my hands steady despite the pain in my chest. The hardest part was over. Now all that remained was watching the consequences unfold. My desk phone rang. Marcus again. "Boss, you're going to want to hear this. Just got word that Desert Palm Medical is threatening to terminate their lease with Ellison if the waste situation isn't resolved. Something about joint commission compliance." The dominoes were falling faster than even I had anticipated. Richard Ellison had built his empire on the assumption that the little people who provided essential services would always be replaceable. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The call came at 6:43 a.m. on a Tuesday, exactly 51 days after I'd terminated the Ellison contract. I was reviewing the final sale documents with Harrison Klein when Maria burst into the conference room. "Miss Eleanor, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Daniel's on line 1. He says it's an emergency." I excused myself and took the call in my office. Daniel's voice was raw, stripped of all pretense. "They fired me." The words came out hollow, disbelieving. Richard called me into his office an hour ago, said I was a liability, that my family connections were detrimental to the company's operational stability. I said nothing, letting the silence stretch. "Mom?" His voice cracked like a teenager's. "Are you there?" "I'm here." Amelia broke off the engagement yesterday. Said her father gave her an ultimatum. Me or her trust fund. Guess which one she chose? A bitter laugh. The wedding planner had already been paid. We lose the deposits. "I see." "That's it? That's all you have to say? You destroyed my life and all you can say is, 'I see'? What would you like me to say, Daniel?" "I don't know," the words exploded out of him. "Something, anything, gloat. Say I told you so. Tell me I got what I deserved." "You did get what you deserved," I said evenly. "You built your life on the premise that you were better than where you came from. Better than me. You aligned yourself with people who saw you as useful only as long as you could distance yourself from your roots. This was always going to be the outcome. I was trying to make something of myself. You were already something. My son, a young man with every advantage I could give you. But that wasn't enough, was it?" Silence again, broken only by his ragged breathing. "What am I supposed to do now?" The question came out small, lost. "That's up to you. You're 35 years old, Daniel. You have an Ivy League education I paid for. Work experience, no student loans. You're already ahead of 90% of the population. Figure it out. Would you consider hiring me?" The question hung between us, loaded with irony. My son, who'd been so ashamed of the family business, now asking for a job? "No," I said simply. Graves Waste Solutions has a strict policy about respecting all employees and the work they do. I don't think you'd be a good cultural fit. "Mom, please." Besides, the company isn't mine anymore, as of, I glanced at my watch, 30 minutes ago. I'm officially a minority stakeholder and consultant. Harrison Klein is your new CEO. "You sold it? You actually sold it?" "For $52 million. The papers are signed. The wire transfer is complete." $52 million, he repeated numbly, "and I won't see a penny of it." "Why would you? You were ashamed of this money, remember? Ashamed of how it was earned. I wouldn't want to burden you with garbage profits." "This isn't fair." "Fair?" I laughed, short and sharp. "Was it fair when you called me human garbage? Was it fair when you let the Ellisons mock me? Was it fair when you chose them over the woman who sacrificed everything for you?" "I made a mistake." "No, Daniel. A mistake is forgetting to call on Mother's Day. A mistake is missing dinner because of work. What you did was a choice. A calculated, deliberate choice to trade your mother for social status. And now, you're living with the consequences. So that's it? You're just going to let me twist in the wind?" "I'm going to let you experience what I experienced 35 years ago, starting from nothing, building something from scratch. The difference is, you won't have a 7-year-old son depending on you. You won't have to choose between gas and groceries. You already have advantages I never dreamed of." I have nothing. No job, no fiancé, no mother who'll swoop in and fix everything. No, you don't have that anymore. You burned that bridge in front of 50 witnesses. More silence. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. I really am sorry. For what I said, for all of it. I know, I said, but sorry doesn't rebuild trust. Sorry doesn't erase public humiliation. Sorry doesn't undo the moment my only child stood in a room full of strangers and declared me worthless. You're really gonna leave me with nothing? I'm leaving you with what you gave me that night. Nothing but the knowledge that someone you loved threw you away like garbage. The difference is, I built an empire from that pain. Let's see what you do with yours. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were trembling slightly as I returned to the conference room where Harrison waited patiently. Everything all right? He asked. Just tying up loose ends, I said, sitting back down. Where were we? We finished the paperwork within the hour, as I signed the final documents officially transferring majority ownership of Graves Waste Solutions to National Environmental. I thought about the strange journey that had brought me here, from a desperate widow with a broken truck to a multi-millionaire walking away from an empire. Harrison shook my hand warmly. It's been a pleasure, Eleanor. I hope you'll consider staying on as a consultant longer than the contracted 2 years. We'll see, I said. I might want to try retirement, travel, maybe, see something besides the inside of garbage trucks. As I left the building that had been my second home for 15 years, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Ellison Enterprises announces major restructuring amid operational challenges. The article detailed the company's struggles with vendor transitions and infrastructure obstacles. Richard Ellison was quoted as saying the issues were temporary setbacks that would be resolved shortly. Day 58, and they still hadn't found a replacement. Tomorrow, my crews would remove all our specialized equipment from Ellison Properties. Monday, day 61, the health department would start issuing violations. By day 70, the Desert Palm Medical Complex would be in crisis. I sat in my car, looking at the fleet of green trucks one last time. Each one represented a family fed, a future secured, dignity and honest work. My drivers waved as they headed out for afternoon routes, and I waved back. These people had never called me garbage. They'd called me boss, mentor, friend. My phone rang again. Daniel. I declined the call and blocked the number. Some bridges, once burned, weren't meant to be rebuilt. Some lessons had to be learned the hard way. I drove away from Graves Waste Solutions for the last time as owner. $52 million, richer and one son poorer. The money would secure my future. Fund charitable work. Maybe establish a scholarship for children of sanitation workers. As for Daniel, he'd discover what I'd learned all those years ago. When you're at the bottom, covered in the mess of your own choices, you find out who you really are. He thought he was better than garbage. Time would tell if he was right. The evening air was cool on my face as I stood on the balcony of my modest ranch house, watching the sun set over Albuquerque. 6 months had passed since I'd signed away Graves Waste Solutions. 6 months since I'd last spoken to my son. The city lights twinkled below, each one representing lives being lived, trash being generated, dreams being built or destroyed. I'd heard things, of course. The industry was small, and gossip traveled fast. Ellison Enterprises had hemorrhaged money trying to manage their waste crisis. 3 different companies, none with the right certifications or equipment, violations from the health department. The Desert Palm Medical Complex had terminated their lease after a catastrophic inspection failure. The dominoes fell exactly as I'd known they would. Richard Ellison had been forced to sell 2 properties at a loss to cover the operational disasters. His empire, built on the assumption that essential services would always be available at his beck and call, had cracked under the weight of his own arrogance. As for Daniel, Maria, bless her loyal heart, had kept me informed despite my requests not to. He'd applied to 73 jobs in 6 months. His Ellison connections were poison now. Nobody wanted to hire Richard's former golden boy. His engagement to Amelia had become a cautionary tale in social circles, whispered about at the same parties where I'd been humiliated. Last I heard, he was working as a junior analyst at a small firm in Phoenix, starting over at 35, earning what he'd made as a fresh graduate, living in a studio apartment, driving a 10-year-old Honda, learning what it meant to build something without a safety net of family money or connections. I sipped my wine, a good vintage now that I could afford it, and thought about the strange turns life took. That desperate young widow with $43 to her name could never have imagined standing here, wealthy beyond her wildest dreams, but alone on a Tuesday evening. My phone sat silent on the table beside me. In the early days after the sale, it had rung constantly. Business associates, charity organizations, investment advisors. Everyone wanted a piece of Eleanor Graves, the waste management millionaire. But not the one person whose call I might have answered, if he'd tried again, if he'd shown real growth, real understanding. But Daniel had stayed silent after that last desperate flurry of calls. Perhaps he'd finally understood that some things, once broken, couldn't be fixed with apologies or promises. I'd had everything once, a thriving business, a son I'd have died for, the satisfaction of building something from nothing. Now I had $52 million and an empty house. The money was nice. It meant security, freedom, the ability to help others struggling as I once had. But it couldn't fill the Daniel-shaped hole in my heart. Still, I regretted nothing. He'd called me human garbage in front of those glittering people, reduced my life's work to something shameful. He'd chosen the Ellisons' conditional acceptance over my unconditional love. That was his right, just as it was my right to show him that the infrastructure he took for granted, the invisible services that made his cushy life possible, were provided by people worthy of respect. The waste management industry had taught me patience, strategy, and the value of things others discarded, but it had also taught me that some things were too toxic to recycle. Some relationships, once contaminated, had to be hauled away for good. I raised my glass to the darkening sky, to the memory of the boy who'd once helped me paint trucks, to the future I'd build without him, somewhere out there. Daniel was learning what I'd always known, that there was dignity in every honest job, value in every hard day's work, and that the people who handled society's waste were the ones who kept civilization running. He'd thought he was better than garbage. He'd thought wrong. The city lights blurred slightly, from the wine. Surely, not from tears I refused to shed. I turned away from the view and went inside my empty house. Tomorrow, I had a meeting with the scholarship committee I was funding. Next week, I'd fly to Europe for the first time in my life. The week after that, who knew? I was 68 years old, wealthy and free. Oh, I'd risen from nothing, built an empire, and used it to teach my son the hardest lesson of his life. Some would call it revenge. I called it justice. As I closed the sliding door behind me, I took one last look at the city where my story had unfolded. Somewhere among those lights, garbage trucks were making their rounds, drivers were earning honest livings, and essential services were keeping the world turning. And somewhere, perhaps, a 35-year-old man was finally understanding that his mother hadn't been human garbage after all. She'd been a queen who'd built her throne from what others threw away. And when someone had dared to call her garbage, she'd used that very throne to crush their dreams into dust. The door clicked shut with a sound like finality. Some stories ended with reconciliation, with families reunited and wounds healed. This wasn't one of those stories. This was a story about a woman who'd found her worth in the most unlikely place and refused to let anyone, not even her own son, tell her she was worthless. In the distance, I could hear the rumble of a garbage truck making its evening rounds. The sound made me smile. It was the sound of dignity, of necessity, of the invisible empire that kept the world clean. It was the sound of victory. My son had been right about one thing. I had used garbage to live, but he'd been wrong about everything else. I hadn't become garbage. I'd become unstoppable. And in the end, when he'd forced me to choose between my dignity and my son, I'd chosen the one that had never betrayed me. I'd chosen myself. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Please drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Did Eleanor make the right choice? What would you have done in her position? Your perspectives mean everything to me, and I read every single comment. Until next time, remember, never let anyone make you feel worthless for honest work.